Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, welcome to today's podcast. We've got Pastor Mike, good friend of mine from Washington, and we are talking today about guarding your heart as a leader. It is a really great, authentic conversation that I think you're just going to love. Guarding your heart. It's an incredible conversation. Before we jump into it, I want to remind you to hit up churchboom.org when you get a chance. If you've not checked out Church Boom University, that is, you can find that at churchboom.org, but Church Boom University is an ongoing way for you to grow as a leader. It's got master classes, books that are sent to you, just a ton of stuff that just helps you continually grow as a leader, which is such an important part that we do as pastors and leaders in the ministry. So, hey, let's jump into the conversation with Pastor Mike. It's a great one. How can I help you today? What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, as a staff, we've been navigating through a lot of different parts of our calling and our commitment levels, depending on pay, depending on time and hours, obviously. And so one of the things we've been discussing that I'd like to pick your brain about is how do you manage the tension between your career and your calling? So your calling obviously asks you to give and to give and to give, but your career says, I work 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, and sometimes it's tough to manage that tension of I have a family at home, the calling is there, my career is here, and I don't want to give any more than what I am absolutely required to give. So how do you manage that with your staff?
Yeah, no, that's great. That is a great question. I think there's a few things, Mike. One is, I would say it won't 100% answer the question, but at first, but I would say there's a danger that I think more of the danger happens as the longer you're in ministering. Yeah. It's interesting how your calling turns into a career. Right. And we don't mean that to happen, but all of a sudden we wake up one day and it's like, man, this has become more of a career than anything, and it's kind of like it starts off with, man, first you're passionate, then it turns into a calling, and then it turns into a career, and if we're not careful, that can happen. So I know that's not exactly what you were asking, but I do think for pastors that have been in the ministry for a long time, we have to watch it and make sure that our calling doesn't turn into a career. As it pertains to that, I do think that it's pretty obvious there has to be balance. I always think that language shapes behavior and behavior shapes culture. And a language term that I'm kind of always hung on to is this idea that you are a priest to your home first. I literally use that word, even though we're not priests, but I always say we're a priest to our home first. I think we all know that in theory. I don't know if we actually practice that. Right. And just trying to figure out how to keep that in balance, I think, is important. I think you have to lead the way as the pastor. Mm-hmm. I've always been impressed with Craig Groeschel's social media. And here's why. Go look at the last 20. And probably 7 out of the last 20 are nothing to do with leadership or some great quote he shared or some amazing place he spoke at. It had to do with his wife or his kids. Right. And I think he models that to the family. I know someone that him and I become great friends, but he was on his staff for about 10 years. And he said, bro, he goes, what he puts on social media, that is his life. Wow. He models it. And I think modeling that is an important part of it and making sure that our staff is staying in balanced. One thing I always have told staff is, you're no good. You're no good to me. No, I tell them, you're no good. Sometimes I tell them, you're no good to me if your family's a mess.
Right.
Yeah. So you got to keep your family balanced. Otherwise, I tell people all the time, you can lose your career and still have your family, but if you lose your family, you lose your career too. So you better keep that right, and with your kids and all that stuff. So I think we have to model it. I think we have to remind them. I think we have to keep them in there. And I think once in a while you got to remind people, don't let your calling turn into a career. because they lose that passion. It's like, I think this has just become a career to you. And I'd say that happens quite a bit. I see guys quite a bit that happens to, and I think we have to be careful with that as well.
What do you
Yeah.
think are some of the signs of whether it's a lead pastor or staff, some of the signs where it has become more of a career than a calling?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great follow-up question. A few things that come to my mind that I see, that I've seen with pastors that we've coached and people on my team and just whatever, is, in no particular order, is one, I've noticed they have a passion shift. It just starts to shift. Their passion just doesn't seem to be as strong. It's not that they don't love the Lord, not that they don't love the local church, but like, you're not as passionate as you used to be. Secondly, there's not a lot of ideas coming out of you anymore. It's not that you've lost creativity. God didn't take that away from you. I just don't think you think about it very much anymore. I think when they overly count hours and time off and they become so rigid where I'm like, okay, I get it. You got to balance it. But when I start feeling it, I'm like, you're getting rigid. So those are just some of the things, the rigidness, the, if that's a word, the passion for sure. And the idea, it's that idea where it's like, man, you used to just pop out ideas. And now it's just like, you do your job, you clock in, you clock out, you're gone. You're not coming up with solutions. You're not throwing out a bunch of ideas, whether we use them or not. You're not just like, hey, what if we did these 10 things, you know? And, you're not excited anymore like that, like you used to be. And I've noticed that with guys over the years where I'm like, man, there's been a change. And God didn't take away your creativity. And you're not getting less creative because you're getting older.
Yeah.
You're just not excited about it like you used to be.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that starts to show up in the way that they act and the way that they speak and the way they are in meetings. Are they solution driven or problem driven? I think you start seeing it. And when you see that, I think it has to be addressed.
Yeah.
I think you can't let it go on too long. I think you have to have that honest conversation with someone about that. And I've been there before.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. One of the things I shared last week is the importance of margin and having that margin. But there are times where the calling will come upon you where you have to put a little bit of extra time in.
Yeah.
If it's every day, then there's a problem. But if it's from time to time, but
Sure.
you're always saying no,
Yeah.
I think that's a problem. So yeah, that was perfect. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Well, let me add you one more thing I just thought of. Years ago, I've had two, you know this, I've had a few coaches in my life for years and years and years and years. I've always had coaches that I regularly want to meet with, and because I think it's so important. But years ago, my coach was in town, and he says, hey, where do you work out at? I said, LA Fitness. He goes, meet me there at 6 in the morning. And I said, are we doing coaching? He goes, something like that. And so he was trying to tell me to balance my life. So we did a workout together, had fun, and he goes, here's what I want to show you. So he takes me on the treadmill. Dude, he pumps that treadmill up to like 15.0, and I didn't even know there was a 15. I'm like, oh, God, just, he's one of those guys, you can hear it all through the gym. Boom, boom, that whole thing. You've been in the gym when that guy's doing it. I'm like, hey, buddy, calm down there, bionic man. And thinks he's Steve Majors. And so, dude, I'm running at 15, and I'm about to die, and then boom, he drops it down to 2. Right? And then I just walk, and I catch my breath. Everything's fine. Then he puts it back up to 15, then drops it down to 2. And then he just said, he goes, this is a fun way to let you know you can run at 15, but you can only do it for a few minutes.
Wow.
And he goes, then you got to bring it down to 2. And I thought, that's it. So I tell staff all the time, there's times when I want you to run at 15. But I also have to make sure there's times where they're running at 2.
So good.
I have to be able to do that to keep that balance. So, yeah.
So good.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, then this leads to my next question then.
Yeah.
For those who have had success, how do you deal with the attitude of entitlement, right? And I think this is maybe found more in lead pastors. That I've been here for so long, I've had this amount of success, so I'm entitled to the special parking spot. I'm entitled to all these extras that the rest of the staff doesn't get, but because you're the lead guy, you begin to feel entitled. So how, as a lead pastor, do we deal with that if we're really going to be honest with ourselves and say, man, there's parts of my life where I feel entitled because of the success I've had?
Yeah. Yeah. I one of the most unique questions I've had, and one of the best questions I've had in a while. I tell you, on a podcast or anywhere, I think I have to guard my own heart for it. But man, there are some pastors that I know that I'm in relationship with, and they've had phenomenal success, and God's done incredible things. But I'm listening to their language and their feeling of entitlement, when maybe they retire early, and then they say, "This is what I should get paid until the day I die." I'm like, I mean, it can get really, really high where I'm like, okay, it's not that the board's offering something, or it's not that, and I do think you should be honored. Don't get me wrong, because I feel like I've been honored over the years. I just think when it's like, okay, there's this sense of like, it's not a collaborative honor. It's more of you're standing your ground to fight for what you think is yours. And I think if you have to fight everywhere to hang on for what is yours, what you think is yours, and there's, the Bible says there's wisdom and counsel. And if there's not a few board members going, "Brother, you deserve that," if there's not a staff member going, "Man, this is what we want to do for you," and you feel like that it should happen, but but there's a collaborativeness of honor, I think that's a greater sign that your heart is staying in the right place. Okay. But I know of a specific situation that just happened in the last few months that I've been part of that conversation, where the board wasn't for it, the staff wasn't for it, and that pastor just dug his heels in the ground and said, "This is what I should get." Contract drawn up, everybody signed it, and I'm like, and it was tremendously healthy financially, and where I feel like, dude, you had to fight for it. There wasn't honor; just seemed to be thrown out the window. And I think that entitlement starts to happen when honor starts to disappear.
So good.
And that I think you have to make sure that that it's there somewhere. If you're fighting for it, you're probably fighting alone.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't stick up and for your hey, I need this or I need that. I'm not saying you shouldn't stand firm for what you need. I'm not saying that, but you can feel it in your own heart when it's like no one's for it right now.
Yeah.
You're fighting for something because you feel something. And so when entitlement doesn't have honor, when you're fighting for something that doesn't have honor, I think that's where entitlement shows up. And I think that's when you're starting to feel it. But they do feel it.
Yeah, I think it's real interesting you say that, because when we think of honor, we think of people honoring us as the lead pastor, right?
Yeah.
But what you're saying is we need to honor our board, we need to honor our teams in this area of our lives, and prefer honor over being entitled to something.
Right. I think there's nothing wrong with saying, guys, this is what I'm believing that I would need. This is what this is whatever. Most of the time it happens when your succession's happening, but this is what I need right now financially, or this is what I need for the future, or there's nothing wrong with stating your needs. I mean, nothing. I have no problem with that. Tell me. But man, when it turns into almost like, hey, I'm the lead pastor and I'm going to kind of bully my way through this. Man, if you're not sensing honor coming back and there's not this thing happening, it's like, man, I think you're edging on the side of entitlement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a really dangerous place to get to. And because here's why. Not only the longer I think you're in ministry, you might feel more entitled, especially if there's success. But you also have to be sensitive, because I always feel that the longer you're in ministry, the less people are honest with you.
Yeah, that's really good.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going to have some self-awareness to be like, they're not pushing for me. They're not pushing against me in this honor moment that I think I deserve. They're not pushing against me, but they're not pushing for me. Right. And I would look at a guy and say, they're not pushing against you, because the longer you're in ministry, the less people are honest with you. But you need to read it. If they're not for you, I always say people are paddling with you. They're paddling for you, against you, or not at all. And if they're not paddling for you, like they're not in the boat going, come on, man, we believe in you, Pastor. If they're not paddling at all, that's not a sign that they believe that what's being said needs to happen. Mm-hmm. Their silence is not approval. So be careful with that,
That's
and you have to be self-aware.
yeah, yeah.
You gotta be really
I really
self-aware.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then yeah, that also leads to the other question that I have for you
Yeah.
is what should anyone who's in ministry has been watching the latest news, and we've had some mega church pastors recently have some moral failures, and it's not
Hmm.
anything new.
Right.
But what should our response be when we're talking to our ministry teams, to our staff, even conversations with my wife? What should those conversations be like when you're looking and seeing all these things of these pastors coming out that they did these things, and here we are, and of course when that happens to a megachurch pastor, then everybody looks at us like if we're doing the same.
Hmm.
Um, so what should our response be to all this news of these guys falling?
Well, that I one is, and I think there's a few, but one is I think that we need to make sure that our conversation is absolutely embodied with a ton of grace,
Mm,
mercy, love, free of casting judgment and pointing fingers.
mhm.
I don't think a moment in someone's life does not define their whole life. It was a moment. It's a bad moment, and it's a moment that's going to create damage. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like the entire heart was wrong, and everything that the person ever did, there wasn't fruit. There's plenty of fruit, plenty of kingdom fruit.
Mhm.
Um, I am not a fan of when people, in my opinion, I think we quickly kick people to the curb.
Yeah.
And like, oh, that's it. I'm like, I don't know. You know, there's a guy that I won't say the name, but if I said the name, you'd know it. Everybody knew he had a moral failure 15 years ago. Got his restoration. That guy's in charge of one of the largest ministries currently in America because people didn't kick him to the curb. They just said, well, let's get you through this. And I think we just need to train our staff and our team. Like, we don't talk negative. We
Yeah.
don't talk. This is not joking time. This is not let's crack a joke time. This is grace, love, and mercy time, personally.
Yeah.
Now, the other side of the coin is also, it is, hey, the enemy's always on the search.
Yeah.
He's always trying to bring us down. And it doesn't matter if we're, the well-known household name in ministry or we're not. He's always trying to bring us down. He's always trying to hurt us. You always got to keep your guard up. I think the guard up is sort of the natural go-to. But teaching mercy and grace probably is not the natural go-to. Anything bad that happens in America, anything a president, vice president, former president does is on SNL, and it's funny, and we all laugh, and we just think it's all. And I get all that and whatever, and I just don't know in our ministry if we need to let that blend into or bleed into when someone falls. It's just like, well, let me tell you what I think we need to do. I think we need to stop and pray for him and his wife and his kids. I think we need to stop and pray for the church. I think we
Yeah.
need to,
So
that's
good.
this is what we're going to do. We're
Yeah.
going to commit at this staff, not forever, but for the next month or two. Every staff meeting we come together, we're going to pray for this pastor and his church and his staff and his team and his wife, his kids. Man, I think that would make a huge statement if we just did something like that.
I really like that.
Just a little 1 minute prayer at every staff meeting would absolutely show this is what we do at our church. I can't speak for every church in America, but this is how we will respond.
Yeah. 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 Really like that.
Yeah.
Something that I do personally. Last week I was on a ministry trip for 4 days to Orlando, and I got back on a Thursday. The next day I went golfing with my associate pastor, and we're having a really good time. But in the middle of one of the holes, he stopped the cart and he looked at me and he said, "All right, you were gone for 4 days. Let's talk about it. Any temptation? Did you see something? Did you look at something? Um, and I need you to be real with me, Mike." And it was a real healthy conversation,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that I have people like that in my life
Right.
can help keep me above reproach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because whether it's a mega church or a smaller church,
Yep.
the enemy's after all of us.
He's after everybody. Yep, 100%. Jesus said to Peter one time, he was talking about the disciples. He said, the enemy is sifting among you. And he's looking for a crack in the heart somewhere. I'm thinking, he's sifting. I don't care if it's a church of 50 or a church of 50,000. He's sifting. And we just got to be careful. And then, and when something happens, we got to model mercy, grace, love. And I think one of the greatest little action things we can do is, we're not going to do it forever, but for the next 8 weeks, we're going to open in staff prayer. We're going to mention this pastor and his wife and his kids.
So good. I like that.
And I think that just makes a huge statement to the staff.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Anything else, man?
No, I mean, those are just the things that have been on my heart lately. You know, my heart breaks for some of these things that are happening.
Yeah, sure.
And so we do those things that you're talking about. We're trying to do as well.
Good.
Because we know that the enemy's after all of us.
Of course.
And our character. And
Yep.
in your book, Saving Your Church from Itself, you talk about how the enemy waits till you're at your greatest level of effectiveness before coming at you and exposing you.
Yep.
And that just is so true. And so thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, dude, good to see you. Always great to hang out with you. One of the funniest guys I know. We share the same weird humor, but it's
Right, absolutely we do.
thanks, man. I appreciate you, buddy.
Appreciate you.
All right,
God
dude.
bless.
Have a good day. Thank you so much for being a part of today's podcast. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Pastor Mike. Want to remind you, as I did at the beginning, about churchboom.org. Make sure you check out in churchboom.org. You'll find Churchboom University. It's a place where you can grow as a leader. Resources are sent to you, master classes, special Zoom calls that are just for you to learn and grow and develop. So make sure you check that out. Become a member of Church Boom University because I think leaders constantly have to be learning. I think that's a big responsibility of ours. So make sure you check that out, and we will see you on the next podcast.